Hello, and welcome to another episode of Social Workers Arise. It is your host, Catherine, here. Today, we are going to be talking about trauma-informed assessments. This is going to be a short snippet of the workshop that I did back in 2024 on this same topic, and is just a really short section of the larger course that I have, the Clinical Essentials for the Future Therapist. So why are we even talking about this, right? Why is it important to be trauma informed? One is that most of the clients that we are going to encounter have experienced some sort of trauma, right? 62% of adults have experienced at least one or more traumatic events in their life, and 25% of adults have experienced 3 or more traumatic events. And what is even more interesting is that social workers are more likely than the general population to have experienced 3 or more traumatic events in our lives. So chances are this could also apply to you or a colleague or somebody that you know. So it's really important just to have the basics. And this is a very extremely brief overview because this can be an entire college course on how to do trauma-informed assessments. But I'm just giving you a very brief, basic overview of it, okay? Just for your information. And you may be listening to this because maybe you're not feeling very confident in your skills. Maybe you haven't had specific training around doing assessments, which is fine because a lot of us haven't. A lot of times in grad school, they really try to teach us everything that they can, but sometimes there's just not room or space to teach everything, like things that we're actually going to use in the field on a daily basis. And also, too, each organization has their own way of doing assessments. So, again, this is going to be a general overview that you could pretty much take anywhere and adapt it to any setting that you're in. And this is especially helpful for you if you are working in a clinical setting such as community mental health, child protective services, adult protective services, even medical social work, which is primarily my background is medical. So I'm giving you the very high level overview of this, right? So there's certain populations who are actually most at risk for trauma. And the research has shown that the risk for traumatic events is particularly higher in populations who identify as Black, Hispanic, multicultural, people with less than a high school education, people who are low income or who may be unemployed or unable to work, or people who identify as the LGBTQ population. And this is just, again, high level overview. There are other populations who are also at risk and experience traumatic events, right? So the purpose of your assessment is to first just gather and analyze information about a client's situation, their needs, their strengths, and the challenges. These are all going to help guide the development of an effective intervention or your treatment plan, right? So one of the most common assessments that we're going to do in social work is the biopsychosocial assessment, or they call it the psychosocial assessment, right? And this is going to be very, very common in a lot of different settings, including medical settings, mental health clinics, substance use programs, child welfare, and even private practice. I use this all the time when I get a new client. So essentially, the purpose of the assessment is you want to paint a picture of the individual or their family within their environmental context. So really taking the systems perspective with this. And it's going to help you to identify their resources, look at the risks that they might be having, and be able to connect them with appropriate services, right? So there's 3 main components of a biopsychosocial assessment. And we're going to break this word down because the word itself says it, right? Biological. What are there physical health conditions that might be impacting their quality of life, that might be impacting their mental health? So psycho, the psychological conditions or the emotional and mental wellness, what's going on there? And the social conditions, right? So the social wellness, their relationships. And we'll kind of break this thing down a little bit more, right? So you might be wondering, okay, why are we going to look at the biological factors if we're mental health practitioners, right? So for example, when I worked in the medical setting, I would encounter a lot of people who experienced a very serious illness. And especially if this illness is coming on quick, maybe cancer or a heart attack or even a broken hip, right? Now, all of a sudden, this person's life has done a 180. Last week, they were going to the movies, they were walking around at the mall, they were seeing their family, they were playing sports and walking around their block. Now, boom, all that's gone. And they're struggling with their identity. How are they going to cope? How are they going to pay their bills? How are they going to support their family? How are they going to care for themselves? So there's all of the ways that our physical health impacts our emotional and mental well-being, right? This also includes if they're taking medications, those medications could have side effects. If they have pregnancies or have lost pregnancies, that could impact their emotions and their grief. And also, too, if they're using any kind of substances to cope, right? Next, we're going to talk about some psychological factors. The psychological factors are going to include their mental health history, right? So any past or current mental health diagnoses, any kind of treatments or therapies that they have tried, and how did those go? How did it work? How are they cognitively functioning? Essentially, like how is their mind working? Do they have good memory? Are they paying attention to you? Are they able to think critically, do problem solving? Do they have the social skills, right? Emotional functioning. So emotional regulation, coping, any kind of current emotional distress. Are they quick to anger? Are they flat? Do they suppress their emotions? Are they overly emotional? How are they functioning emotionally? Are they crying often? Things like that. Okay. Next up is, and the final area is the social function. So this is going to include a lot of different areas as far as family history, their current and past social support, their sexual orientation, the socioeconomic status. So how are they doing financially? Their cultural background, their language, who are they living with? Where are they living? What is their community like? Any kind of legal issues, their spirituality or religion. Do they have a job? Do they need a job? Essentially, how are they functioning, right? So that's essentially the psychosocial part of the assessment. And next, we're going to jump into being trauma informed. So how are we collecting this information in a way that is being sensitive to the fact that this person may have experienced trauma in their past, and they may still be experiencing consequences from that trauma? We just don't know, right? So essentially what you want to do with trauma informed is assume that everybody you have encountered has experienced trauma. And you want to be very sensitive to this, because if you say, well, they didn't tell me they've ever experienced trauma, so therefore they never did, which is not true. Because a lot of times when we've experienced trauma, we're not telling it to everybody. We're not parading it around. We're not telling it to the new social worker that we meet, right? We don't even want to talk about it. Sometimes we don't even want to acknowledge that even happened, right? So never assume that just because somebody didn't tell you that there was trauma, that there was no trauma. For example, and here's a kind of a lighter example, right? So in high school, well, I guess it's not very light, so I'll give you in high school, I experienced a wildfire and my home burned down, right? So the community was shut down because of the fires. I'm in California, so we have them, often. But this was the first time that I was actually affected or had known anybody to be affected. And so the school was closed down for a couple days, and a lot of the teachers that I had, they were not trauma informed. And they asked the entire class, they said, "Hey, did anybody lose a house? Did anybody's house burn down? Raise your hand." Okay, I was not about to raise my hand because I'm introverted. I was shy. I hardly talked to anybody. I had like a handful of friends and they were not in my classes. So when they said, raise your hand if your house burned down, absolutely not. You cannot pay me enough money to have raised my hand in that moment. And later on, I went privately up to the teachers and I'd say, "Hey, I actually did lose my house and I need to figure out a way to get new textbooks so I could do the homework." And would you believe? I kid you not, some of them did not believe me. One of them said, "Well, I asked during the middle of class and you didn't raise your hand." And I'm thinking, okay, as a 16-year-old, I had no words. But as an adult, as a trained mental health professional, I now have the words that you cannot expect people to just be putting their trauma on full display for people to know about, or to, we have rights to privacy. So I digress. So that is just an example of, we just assume that people have experienced that, even if they're not talking about it, right? And when I say trauma, what am I talking about when I'm saying experiences that may be traumatic? Let's kind of break that down. Trauma includes anything that might be like physical, sexual, emotional abuse, childhood neglect, living with a family member with mental health or substance use disorders, sudden or unexplained separation from a loved one, poverty, racism, discrimination, oppression, violence in the community, war, terrorism, natural disasters, right? So there could be other experiences that people have, also war. Oh, I said war. Yeah. There could be other experiences outside of this that may be traumatic for people, but these are generally what we're talking about. Really, it kind of breaks it down to anytime that you are fearful or scared that your life may be in danger or the life of those that you love may be in danger, right? So some general trauma-informed principles are safety, trustworthiness and transparency, empowerment and collaboration, cultural sensitivity, and acknowledging the trauma, and using a strengths-based focus. And that's just, again, very brief overview. And lastly, what I'll say about that is that your language matters. So you always want to make sure that you're using non-judgmental, person-first language. So for example, maybe use survivor instead of victim. I know when talking about people who are without homes, they don't say homeless, but people might say, again, people without homes, or an individual who is unhoused, right? So another example might be someone with addiction as opposed to, oh, they're an addict, right? So we don't want to label them. We don't want to be calling them names, but we want to be very sensitive to that. We're always referring to them as a person. Number one, a person who, and then, whatever it is that they may be experiencing or struggling with. Okay. So a lot of things to kind of keep in mind is that you want to ensure that they feel safe with you, that you don't want to pressure them to answer these questions if they don't feel comfortable. You want to take your time. And it can be hard because a lot of times when we're working in social work settings, the settings don't necessarily allow for that, right? But by doing this, we're showing that we're trustworthy. By being transparent around reporting requirements and around goals and collaboration and why are you asking these questions, it helps to make them feel safe and that you are a trustworthy person, right? that you're being sensitive to their culture, right? And that we're acknowledging that there may be some trauma there. So there is so much more. Again, this is a really brief overview. If you are interested in learning more about this, I would encourage you, one, maybe take a training specifically around trauma, because if you are trained in trauma, this will take you a very, very long way in social work. This will look amazing on your resume. And most importantly, it'll give you a lot of really great insights and skills into how to help people who have experienced trauma, who are coming to you and your agency looking for help. And people in all settings have experienced trauma. So if this is something that you're looking to get certified in, definitely, consider investing in it. If you're more looking to build your clinical skills and confidence around the assessment part, around documentation, using cognitive behavioral therapy, using your clinical skills, then I would recommend the course, The Clinical Essentials for the Future Therapist. So that course is going to teach you the foundational for clinical skills. If you want trauma, that would be a whole separate different course. And I can definitely make recommendations for you on that if you reach out to me and message me. If this was helpful for you, make sure to share it with a friend, share it on social media. Also, make sure that you're part of the email list, because throughout 2025, I'll be doing free trainings for social workers. And they're just like this, right? For example, this was just a snippet of the training that I did on trauma-informed assessments, but I'll be doing more around in 2025. So if nothing else, get on the email list so you know about these free trainings that are coming up. I'll send you updates on what we're talking about in the podcast. And with that, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast because you don't want to miss an episode. And I will talk to you next week. Bye.